God's peace, everyone. It's an honor for me to sit with you today and to share answers to several questions that come from the scriptures, as well as share insights that I've been able to develop over almost 40 years now. It'll be 38 years in less than a month that we've been serving the Lord here at Glory of Christ Church. And I wanted to share with you, first of all, before answering questions and discussing very important topics, I'm looking forward to giving you a background as to how I learned what it is I'm going to be sharing. It's something that I learned from a combination of sources over many years. It all started, really, when my mom and dad were not able to have any kids. And for 18 years, they struggled to conceive, and mom just couldn't. Ultimately, by His awesome grace, with the help of some very professional Jewish doctors, Dr. Moldovan and Alchek, those are the names. They worked with mom, and they cleared out what had to be cleared out in her womb, and I came along. Now, mom had promised to God that if He gave her a son, that she would give him to the Lord, similar to what Hannah did for Samuel. Now, I'm not saying I'm Samuel, but the point is it's a very similar story. And unfortunately, mom didn't follow her example because she forgot her promise. Mom was raised Presbyterian in Puerto Rico. And she came when she married my dad. They got married in a Roman Catholic church. Well, as you can imagine, she basically forgot where she was raised, and she followed the Roman Catholic tradition. So I was baptized as a baby, as is the custom for most Spanish children, especially those, from Puerto Rican parents. And I was raised in the Catholic Church, in St. Cecilia's to be exact. And mom made sure I had First Communion, that I had the confirmation, all the traditional stuff. Basically what I'm saying is I was raised in a very religious, traditional home. My parents were not practicing Catholics. They were nominal. They were just, cultural Catholics, basically. You baptize your kids, you make sure they have First Communion. If you really want to go all the way, give them confirmation. But that's basically it. And go to church on, of course, what we used to call Easter Sunday. And if you really push it, you can go on Christmas Day. But that's basically it. That was the extent of how much, quote unquote, religious background I was exposed to. And in fact, when I turned of age to go to school, mom sent me to a public school. Now, she had sent me initially to a Roman Catholic nursery. And that was not a pleasant experience for me. And that's another story for another day. Just let you know, I had no idea who those ladies were in the funny looking clothes. And it was a very dark nursery. And remember, it was very scary for me. So I was there about a year. After that, mom just took me out completely. And as soon as I turned age for kindergarten, I went to PS 171. It's also called Patrick Henry High, a school now in El Barrio. And I was there for 5, what I consider to be wonderful years. And as I entered my 6th year there, I was there for kindergarten and all the way through the beginning of 5th grade. I loved it. Big, bright school, education was great. It was wonderful. But then we had the first teacher strike in New York City history. And mom panicked and took me out of PS 171 and put me into a Catholic school. And that's how this all now connects to who I am today. Because in the middle of 5th grade, I was stuck into St. Cecilia's Grammar School. Again, El Barrio, 106th, right off 3rd Avenue. It was what an experience, going from a bright, modern environment to the Middle Ages, basically. Because the school was ancient. It was around, the building was around from the Civil War times. Very dark building, scary, physical discipline that the teachers gave to the students, which I had never experienced. So it was there in that time that I lost the ability to see clearly. Because I was so traumatized by the change that I literally one day I looked at the blackboard, I couldn't read the letters. I started wearing glasses, which I had up until just a few years ago. Long time. But looking back, I realized that I found comfort in the fact that besides all this educational things, they would take us to church. Church was mandatory. In fact, even when I was at PS 171, they had something called release time, which I think it was Wednesdays. They would let us out early from school to go to St. Cecilia's rectory and take Bible studies to prepare us for First Communion. So there I remember seeing these big charts and pictures of Jesus, Mary, Joseph, the saints. But again, it was just like another class for me. I had First Communion. Then when I went to St. Cecilia School, they prepared me for confirmation, which is another thing that most young people who are Catholic have got to experience. I learned all that. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being academic. And it began to be something, I began to be curious about it. What is all this stuff? And in fact, what spurred me on even more when I began to realize that there was something beyond all the academic learning, even the teaching for communion and for confirmation, was that one day, about a block and a half away, Dad had a store that he would rent out for people that had push carts in El Barrio. And they would park their push carts there overnight. Dad was a consummate businessman. He made money every way he possibly legitimately could. So he rented an empty space and turned it into a parking lot for push carts, And I would spend my entire summers there while he's watching over his things. Anyway, long story short, I made friends with the boys in that block, and we used to hang out and throw rocks at each other and open up their hydrants and get blasted with the fire hydrants. 107th Street between Park and Lex. The building is still there. But it was one of those days where I was playing with a friend of mine named Johnny Luciano. It was a rainy day, and all my other friends were out who knows where. It was just Johnny and I, and Dad was sitting in front of his parking lot store, I called it. And he and I crossed the street to this big empty lot. There used to be a movie theater, and it was demolished. So there was tons and tons of bricks. So you could imagine, we just throw stones at each other because we were bored out of our minds. It was a cloudy day, Lexington Avenue. And all of a sudden, I remember heavy clouds were over us. And as we're playing, I saw the clouds open. And I figured, I guess the sun's going to come out. But it wasn't the sun. It was something that to this day I have a hard time describing. It was a glowing object. As best I can describe it, it looked like a gem. It was like this with curves on the side, huge. And it was spinning slowly right over where Johnny and I were with this incredible, blinding, bright light. Now, I wasn't having a hallucination because my friend Johnny looked up and put his head down, and covered his eyes. So he was seeing something, and so was I. But I wasn't afraid. There was something there. And I have no idea how long it was. But sooner, after the clouds closed again and it disappeared, I went running to my dad. I asked him, "Did you see that?" He goes, "I saw nothing. All I saw was you looking up and Johnny looking like this." He didn't see a light. He didn't see anything. He just saw us responding. And that day opened my senses to something supernatural, something beyond the norm. And I began to get deeper into the question about, is there a God? Is that who I saw? Was this an angel? I mean, now people would say it's a UFO. Who knows, right? But it was something beyond the norm. And that opened my senses to know that life was more than just what I could physically experience on a day-to-day basis. That every so often something greater would introduce itself into human history. And in my case, it was that day. So I decided to get deeper into my Catholic faith. And I did. Long story. I'm telling you, I can fill several volumes, but I became an altar boy. I served at the Mass every Sunday. I also served during the week. When we had break from school, I'd run to church, serve as an altar boy, and run back to my classes. I mean, I committed 100%. And in that time period, one of the priests, who was still alive, actually, I'll never forget him. He saw my dedication, and he was curious, and he asked me to come to the rectory one day because he figured this kid really is, showing an intense desire to learn about the faith. So he asked me if I would like to become a lector in the Mass. A lector is somebody, hence the word, he reads from either the Old Testament, New Testament, or some other book in the Mass itself during youth Mass, which was at that time on Sundays at 11 a.m. So I started reading, but he realized I had a stutter, pretty bad one. And this priest took me under wing. Every Saturday I'd go to his rectory, and he got rid of my stutter. He trained me to speak clearly, to speak slowly. He had a little reel-to-reel tape recorder back in those days, and he would set me to speak, and then he'd take it further and further out and told me, "Don't yell, speak from the belly." He gave me all these ideas to the point where I could, to this very day, I'm able to speak sometimes without a microphone because he trained me very well. And I served as a lector. I was able to read every Sunday morning. So I was perfectly fine. I enjoyed my faith. I enjoyed my religion. And I felt it was satisfying the hunger that had opened on that day of the experience. But then something even greater happened. Sitting home one day, I was turning. I do this because back then we didn't have remote controls. We had to turn the dial to change channels. Okay, so I'm doing this. It just happens. I was changing channels. I was just sitting home one night bored, and I flipped it to channel 11, and I saw this man preaching in a way I had never seen anybody preach before. Priests, they brought what they call a homily in the Catholic Church. It's like a 5-10 minute, pep talk, basically. Sometimes it's biblical, depends. But this man was not doing that. This man was preaching an entirely new thing that I had never heard. It was the gospel. And the man I'm talking about is Billy Graham. And he preached the word of God and told me that even though I was religious, I had still to make a commitment to Jesus Christ. And I did, right there in front of the TV screen. I did. I prayed with him. I sent for the materials that he sent for free. I began to study the Bible, even though I was still in St. Cecilia's. And then something happened later on, which will be the next soundbite you're going to get, that after I did that and I took his whole Bible course, still being a Roman Catholic, and then something else happened that activated that word that had been sown into me through the materials that Billy Graham organization had sent me. And I'll pick up on that point in the very next soundbite. God's peace. To be continued.